The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
Howdy and welcome to The Secrets of Field of Dreams, where we're talking about the hidden meanings and deeper layers found in the great classic baseball movie, The Field of Dreams. I'm Father Cory Sticha. With me today are Noëlle Crowe and Shelly Kelly. Howdy, Noëlle.
Hi, Father.
And howdy, Shelly.
Howdy back, Father.
Before we begin, I'd like to invite you to go to sqpn.com/merch and get your StarQuest t-shirts, mugs, stickers, and much, much more. So for those who may not have seen this, but of course, this is a classic movie. If you're listening to this, you probably are familiar with Field of Dreams, but it is a 1989 movie based on a 1982 book called Shoeless Joe by W.P. Kinsella. Gee, wonder where he got the last name of his lead character, Ray. Kevin Costner plays that lead character, Ray Kinsella. James Earl Jones is Terrence Mann, and the late Ray Liotta plays Shoeless Joe Jackson. So before we get into the movie, why don't you both kind of tell me what your thoughts on the movie, why you enjoy this movie, what are the things that you really like about it? We'll start with you, Shelly.
Oh, okay. Well, what do I not like about this movie? Nothing. Yeah. There's nothing I don't like about this movie. I love everything about this movie. We're a baseball family, softball baseball family. All three of my children have played. I have one that plays in college, and I have one that plays baseball currently in a travel league. And my husband played baseball, and it's all in his family as well. So everything about this movie is just like comfort and hits you right here in the heart. The only thing we don't get is, of course, we've never been to Iowa, and we've never seen a cornfield like that. So.
Yeah, no, I agree. How about you, Noëlle?
Well, I'm with Shelly on never having been to Iowa, so something we'll have to fix one of these days. But I agree. I am from a baseball family as well. I love baseball. At one point in time, my family said, "You should be a color commentator because you say the things that the color commentator says, like before he says them." Yeah. Because I watched, so much baseball, but it's in the blood. My grandfather actually invented and patented a baseball game that was actually a table, and there were leagues in his town. There were banquets. Cool. There was a really big thing. He was actually marketing them out to the U.S. military for entertainment for the troops before World War II. So, or I think maybe even slightly after that. So, so from way back, baseball has been something that has been in my family, and the love of baseball. And of course, I'm from Massachusetts as well. So all of those scenes in Boston with Fenway Park, that is my home right there. So. Oh, yeah.
Well, Dom wanted to be in this, and unfortunately, due to some personal issues that are going on, he wasn't able to join with this recording. Those who know Dom know that he is in the Boston area, and so I know he loved those scenes whenever they come up as well. So absolutely, I'm kind of with you both. I've always been a fan of baseball. I grew up watching like the Minnesota Twins when they got their 2 World Series in '87 and '91. I remember watching those and how exciting it was for the Twins to win, not once, but twice in 4 years. I mean, it was incredible. And I've always been a fan. I'm St. Louis Cardinals fan because I lived in St. Louis area for 6 years. And my first pro baseball game I ever went to was at Busch Stadium, the second Busch Stadium, but it's the one that was torn down to build the third Busch Stadium that's there now. That was my first pro game, and it was Cardinals versus Twins. And I've been a Cardinals fan ever since. And I love baseball. I love, and the more I've gotten to know about baseball, so much of the notes of this movie hits so hard, because there's a extended quote from Terrence Mann that I'll bring up later that I'm sure you probably know which one I'm thinking of, that when we get to that point, I'll bring up. And it really does speak to why baseball is so important in the United States and why it's so important to me and why I love baseball and still love baseball to this day. Still will watch baseball and just enjoy it. And every chance I can get to go to a pro game or even the little minor league team up in Great Falls, when I can do that too. I enjoy it so much.
That does bring up a point, though, that it doesn't matter whether you're cheering for the World Series winners, Houston Astros, or or the local. We used to have a little local Sugarland Skeeters and travel all over. Every time I go to a different city for a conference, I'm always looking for that minor league, independent league ballpark where I can go and watch a game. So, but it's timeless, and it just kind of is everywhere you go.
Mm-hmm. I was going to say, Father Cory, of course, lives close to the former stomping grounds of a great baseball fan, Mary Fields.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. She lived in this town. She's well known in this town here in Cascade, Montana, where I live. This is where she's at. And we are actually working on having ownership of the chapel at St. Peter's Mission, where she was at. It was owned by the Ursuline sisters that had served here for so many years. Well, our parish is actually working on making it formally a part of my parish. So,
wow, that's exciting.
And I found her gravesite at the up at the cemetery, which I sent you the picture of that.
Yeah, that was great to see that picture. Right, exactly. Yeah, but she was a great baseball fan. Loved children and baseball and everything. Back in the very early days of baseball. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was, she lived right after, Civil War and right after. So baseball was very new sport. It was, relatively unknown in a lot of places and grew in popularity during that time. So, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I forgot about that little connection, too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't want to step on anything exactly, but that one of the things that really captured me, and we can probably get into it more, but from the time I was young, being a history fan, and especially an American history fan that I've been my entire life, is the way that this movie takes you into history. Yeah. Of course, being now we bring that into American Catholic history as well, but just keep doing that and touching on that. But I from the time I was young, just loved that historical aspect of it, getting to go back in time and that timelessness of everything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's an important theme. And actually it's good segue to kind of talking about the themes of the movie itself. And that is one of it is, it's this great fantasy baseball movie. It's a movie about baseball, and it's a movie about these great players throughout the history of baseball. And even in some ways the hopes that were lost. You look at, Moonlight Graham, who he got, a little bit of time, but it wasn't, it was just one inning, half an inning is all he got in the pros and things like that. These hopes that people had, and that very much that history of baseball as well being brought out with it.
Yeah, and I wonder how many people realize that Moonlight Graham is a real person, and that is a real story. Yeah,
I didn't know that. Right. I didn't know that until much later, actually, that actually was true. I don't know if you knew this when I was looking at things, that really beautiful scene where Terrence Mann, James Earl Jones, is interviewing those people in the bar where they're talking about Doc Graham. Those are people who actually knew him, and they're actually telling those real stories. And knowing that and seeing that, and just you can see the emotion as they talk about him is really beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. It's such a great scene. I didn't know that actually till today. I was looking at IMDb and kind of preparation for this. That they were people that drove down from Chisholm, Minnesota, to Iowa where they were filming, and they took over a bar and they used that as the set for all the interviews, and it was such a great scene. Again, these are the real people talking about a real person who touched their lives, and everything that was going on. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Another important theme in this is family, and of course that's kind of the overarching theme for Ray in this whole thing is family. The problems he had with his father, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The things he's missed. He's starting to regret that he didn't spend as much time with his father. He didn't get to know his father as well as he did. He's starting to see that he's about he's getting to the age that his father was, you know, when he, well, not quite, but he's getting older, you know, and he's worried that he's going to turn into his father and things like that, you know, and that's, you know, a very important theme about this movie as well.
Right. He tells his wife at one point that he's 36. I have a wife and a child, and I'm scared to death. I'm turning into my father.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
He says,
and a mortgage.
yeah. And it's also about dreams, right? And he says his father must have had dreams, but he never did anything about it. He said his father was never spontaneous.
See, I find that interesting, and maybe from a different perspective, or the perspective of being older now. You know, he's talking about that, but if you think about it, you know, his dad, he came back from the war, he got married, and then he had responsibilities, and he had a son from the age of 3. You know, he said his mom died when he was 3. So from the age of 3, he's a single dad trying to raise a son. And he says he's a little bit older. So it's interesting. You say, well, is that true that his dad never really did anything about it? Or is that Ray just didn't really appreciate the work and the sacrifices that his father made for him? Like, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, and his dad was 56 years old when Ray was born.
Yeah.
Right.
And so that means that he was, 59 or 60 years old raising a 3-year-old.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Absolutely.
That's got to be exhausting. I mean,
yeah. Well, doing it on his own and working and, you know, everything else that he needed to do. And this was at a time when a lot of, you know, the help that single parents have today wasn't there.
Well, a lot of times in that situation, like the dad would give the child to grandparents or an aunt or friends or somebody else, and kind of leave them there rather than actually doing the work himself, right? So there's a lot of, it's not portrayed that way exactly, but when you step back and think about, well, what was happening here, put the pieces together, there's a lot of nobility and, again, self-sacrifice in doing that. That's not exactly portrayed that way in the way that Ray tells the story.
Because we're seeing it from Ray's perspective, and he doesn't understand his father, because it sounds like, aside from the baseball aspect, he really didn't know his father.
Mm-hmm.
And even the baseball aspect, since we're just jumping into it right now, Father.
No, this is great. This is exactly what I wanted to do. So that's great.
Even in the baseball aspect, he says that his father was a man who didn't make it. It was his dream and he didn't make it. And so he wanted that for his son. And so by the time Ray was, 12,
Teenager.
13 years old, it was like eating your vegetables and taking out the garbage. And so by the time he turned 14 or 15, he quit. He just walked away from it. And as someone who's raised 2 players who one went all the way to university and one's still playing, we ask our kids every single season. So that's every January and every July, August. We ask them, do you want to play because you are having fun and you are loving the game and you want to be on this team? Or are you playing because you feel like you have to because your father played and your father wants you to play? And that's a real important question to ask them. And 13, 14 is the year when they start realizing that if they want to play, they're sacrificing other aspects of their life. And so that is the turning point when a lot of teenagers drop out of the sports. So we really resonated with that when he said that. And I was watching it with my 11-year-old, and his dad comes into the room and says, you know, that's why I ask you, son, every year, are you playing for you? Are you having fun? And, 11 years old, they're like, yeah, whatever, Dad.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, whatever. Yeah. And of course, he rebels and goes into the whole intro. Matter of fact,
right.
But before we kind of get to the intro, we kind of touched on it, but before we get to, first of all, one more kind of precursor thing is, of course, the cast. This is really an all-star cast. I mean, there's Kevin Costner playing Ray Kinsella, and this is
so young.
He looks so young because this is when he was just first really getting big. This is because he had Bull Durham right before this. He had The Untouchables before that, This is when he hit his first real big peak as an actor, where, he put out a movie and it would, it'd sell out. People would go see it just because it was Kevin Costner, and so, he looks very young because he was. I mean, he was in his early 30s, I think. I can't remember for sure.
Probably.
You've got James Earl Jones. What more needs to be said about James Earl Jones? I mean,
right.
He was the voice of the Unas on SG-1. I mean, the Darth Vader on Star Wars. I had to throw that in.
Star Trek.
I did. I think I almost said Stargate but either way. Just an actor that's bigger than life. I mean,
yeah. Well, I was going to say that my reaction as I was watching it again and looking at it was actually about James Earl Jones, that he looks so young.
Mm-hmm.
You don't realize, like, wow, he's, I thought of him as being a little bit older, but actually he was pretty young, it seems like. I actually didn't look up how old he was, but
yeah, I didn't. I forgot to look up too, but he looks a little older than the other cast members.
Mm-hmm.
But he's that personality bigger than life. He just his voice, if nothing else, chews up the scenery.
Well, can you imagine the movie without Kevin Costner? Because the actor they approached to play the role turned it down.
And who was that?
Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks.
Oh, no.
It would have been completely wrong.
Oh, no.
Right?
No. Because that was when Tom Hanks was still doing much more humorous stuff, like Big and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he didn't, it's weird to say, I don't think he even had he didn't have the gravitas for it yet. He just doesn't look the right part. But they went to Kevin Costner. He had just come off of Bull Durham. They weren't sure if he would want to do another baseball movie, and he jumped all over it.
Well, he's a huge baseball fan. He's been a huge baseball fan for a long time, so that doesn't surprise me.
Archie Graham was first offered to Jimmy Stewart.
Oh, that'd been kind of funny.
And he turned it down. And so they went with Burt Lancaster. But it's funny because there's a great scene in this movie where Karen, the little girl, is watching Jimmy Stewart in a clip out of, I think it's Harvey.
Harvey, yes.
Yeah, Harvey, with the rabbit, right?
Yep.
And Ray turns the TV off and Karen says, "Oh, but that was funny, Dad." And he's like, no, he's a sick, very sick man.
He's sick, right? He's hearing things. He's imagining a bunny, right?
That's
exactly.
funny. That's a nice. That's a great little touch. But of course, it was played by the great Burt Lancaster, one of the great Hollywood actors, and sadly, his last movie role. He did a couple more TV shows, and then he died a few years after this came out. But such a great actor, and he played that role so well. Just a kindly small town doc.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the character for James Earl Jones, the actual character was written for James Earl Jones because in the book it's J.D. Salinger.
Okay.
And J.D. Salinger threatened to sue them if they used any part of his likeness or portrayed it as him in any way. And so the director is also the one who adapted the screenplay, Phil Alden Robinson. And he had just seen James Earl Jones on Broadway. I think it was Fences or something like that. And Fences. And so he wrote the fictional character of Terrence Mann, kind of loosely based on the character in the book, but he wrote it specifically with James Earl Jones in mind.
Well, it was good casting because he plays it so well.
Oh, he does.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, seeing the change of his character from, gruff and angry and leave me alone and slamming the door in his face to the joys of being there at the field,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah,
you heard it too.
Yeah, I love that. You were, and then we have Shoeless Joe, Ray Liotta. Again, very early in his career. Mm-hmm. Sadly, he passed away. It was last year, I think it was. Mm-hmm. But such, another great actor.
Another piece of trivia: Ray Liotta never saw this movie.
Really?
He never watched it. He said that in an interview that it was being filmed at a time when his mother was very ill, and so seeing the movie brings him back to all of that tragic associations. He didn't want to ever see it again because he didn't have good feelings for it at the time. So, and it makes perfect sense, of course. But to not watch him in this movie is kind of sad.
Yeah, such a great performance. Such a great performance for that character. Again, another real person that, Shoeless Joe was one of the 8 that was involved in the scandal. So, I mean, he really great character, and even all the minor members of the Sox, the White Sox that were there, great characters, and he really did a good job with them. And then 2 smaller parts, important parts, but smaller parts. You got Timothy Busfield playing Mike, who was the guy who's trying to buy out the farm, brother of Amy, or Annie, who was played by Amy Madigan.
Right.
And of course, both those were actors who were known at that time. They weren't, big name actors, but they were known actors. You saw them in things at this time, so such a great cast, such a great show. So let's get into the movie then. We've been picking at it. I've been trying to kind of hold back till we get, can do it right, but get right to this intro. There's this nice intro that really kind of sets the story through pictures and scrapbook. And, I love the way they did that intro, where, John Kinsella was a huge baseball fan. He loved the White Sox and was heartbroken when that scandal did occur. He tried to play in the minor leagues, and eventually they ended up in Brooklyn, and he became a Yankees fan. So of course, Ray had to become a Brooklyn Dodgers fan, which was the Brooklyn Dodgers at the time, just to spite his dad. That's such a teenager thing to do, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I liked it. He said that his dad put him to bed every night with stories about Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and Shoeless Joe. Yep.
And Shoeless Joe was an idol of his dad, and because his dad knew that Shoeless Joe had been innocent and, was a humble person. Ray was, as you said, Ray was born when his dad was much older. And his mother died when Ray was just 3 years old. So it was just his dad raising him, but which caused a lot of friction, and they were separated for many years. Ray went off to Berkeley and, as far away from him as he could get, all the way out to California, get away from him as far as he could. Shortly after, then that's where he met Annie, met his wife, and then his father died. They got married and had Karen, their daughter. And eventually they bought a farm, because that's what you do. You marry a girl from Iowa and you buy a farm in Iowa.
A couple of hippies from California.
Yeah. And I like that they pulled some of that out. There's a little bit of like the far out and things like that they threw in there to show that these, because Kevin Costner kind of came across as kind of a straight-laced, kind of middle-class businessman type figure. He didn't look like a hippie, You
know what? Growing up in the 80s, some of my parents' best friends, one of them who was just the nicest, modest, easygoing, very Kevin Costner style. And he was a hippie, and they showed me a picture. He had the long hair and wore the clothes and the thing on what is the little like bandana on his head. And
the beads.
I'd have never in a million years as a teenager imagined that he was one of those hippies. But, we're talking and some of the people listening, they won't know this because those hippies are now in their 70s.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're a generation ahead of us.
Woodstock was 69. I mean, how many years ago was that?
I'm
50 some years ago.
Stop it.
Yeah. But, it's like those hippies. Are you showing your age? No.
I was not alive when Woodstock happened.
There you go. Neither was I. So not far beyond that, but not when it happened. But, but the people who went there, they were in their teens, 20s. Well, add 50 some years onto that, and that's where they're at. So, yeah, you're right. They'd be definitely in their 70s, and so and a lot of the people, when they think of the people of the 80s, the people who were the businessmen, they were the fathers and the mothers. They were the CEOs and everything. Yeah, they were the hippies. That's what they became in the 80s. So kind of fits the character.
Teenagers and college students grow up and they go and do normal things that everybody does. So I will say, watching this movie again, because this movie came out in 1989. I think you mentioned that. It had a real good feel to it for me. It was a lot of memories of a much easier going time. that they're driving around and they don't have GPS, and they're driving around and they don't have cell phones. They're calling from payphones. They're waiting for someone to call. They don't know exactly. Annie never really knows where her husband is when he goes out on the road trip. And you don't get that today. And so it was just it was like taking a deep breath and relaxing, and you didn't realize you were holding your breath. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I agree. Nicely, I agree. Yeah. Because the idea of actually having to stop at a gas station and use a payphone.
Yeah.
To call someone.
Nowadays, we'd be like spraying it down with hand sanitizer.
Oh, people did that back then too. You know, those were the germaphobes. But yeah, it is a different time compared to what we're used to today. You know, and it's a good thing. A good thing. Kind of see things a little bit simpler.
Did you notice that when he first hears the whisper, if you build it, he will come. Mm-hmm. He goes in and tells his wife about it, and she's like, you know, this could be an acid flashback from the 60s.
Yeah. Well, it gets better because he goes, I never did LSD. Well, maybe it's a fourth flash, you know, or something like that, you know, flashing forward. I forgot to mention that cast member, the voice. You look in the credits, the voice is himself.
Yeah.
And the director or the producer has never said who the voice is.
Isn't that crazy?
He purposely had a bunch of people, including Ed Harris, who was married to Amy Madigan at the time, and many of the cast members record the voice lines, and he's never said which one it was. Mm. So it's still a secret who the voice was. But of course, that's probably the most famous part of the movie. If you build it, he will come. You know? Mm-hmm. Yeah, everybody knows that line.
That we don't know.
Yeah. You got to have those secrets once in a while. That's kind of fun.
Mm-hmm. No.
But yeah, he's out. You got to love that. I love that scene where he's out in the field and he hears the voice. And of course, his wife thinks he's nuts. And he goes, well, yeah, I probably am. But and then he goes into the feed sales. He goes into the farm sales and starts asking about it. Ray's hearing voices. And everybody looks and it's like, no, not me. I'm just asking if it happens. Seriously. See ya.
I was just saying, it's such a small town thing, right? All of a sudden, it's like passing here and there, and everybody, like, what? I
mean, think about what a crazy thing this is. If you build it, he will come. And you look out and you have this vision of a baseball field in the middle of your cornfield. And this is your livelihood. I mean, this is your finances. This is everything. This is how you're going to feed your child and the farm that you own. Everything's at risk. His whole life is at risk. And his wife says, well, if you really think you should do it, go ahead. And you're kind of like, what?
Yeah.
I honestly don't think that's something I would tell my husband, Well,
he says it's like my last spontaneous thing because I've never done anything crazy is how he puts it in the intro. Kind of his last spontaneous thing he's going to do is build this field, this ballpark. And he does. I love the old John Deere tractor he's riding, the old open cab John Deere tractor. And he plows it down. He mows it down and builds the field. And of course,
and all the neighbors are standing and.
Yep. Yeah, he's got quite the show there. It's a small town. They got nothing better to do. So let's go watch him build this field and see what's going on.
You know what this is? This movie, this voice, It's a calling. I mean, it's just straight up a calling, Yeah. His wife supports him, even when it's difficult, and they face the prospect of losing everything they own. He's plowing up the field and neighbors are gathering. They think he's crazy, Noah and the Ark. Just, exactly. You get a calling and you can't not do it, and all these people come with him or hear it also. And they guide him or they advise him or they walk with him on the journey. But in the end, it's a calling that leads him. Oh, don't give away the ending. The movie's from 1989.
Yeah.
I'll say it when we get there.
I'm not spoiler season
It
ends
just
after
dawned
about
on
2
me,
weeks,
though,
as far as
that
I'm concerned. So
where it's going is
yeah, no, absolutely. You know, and they do play with that. This idea that this was a vocation, this was a call, and that those who have the vision to hear the call, they see the players.
Mhm.
You know, I love
Right.
those scenes where Mark doesn't see him until Doc steps out of the field, and all of a sudden, where do all these players come from?
Right.
He
And
hears
then
the
he just
call at
laughs
that
at
point.
him.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that was great insight though. It really is kind of like a vocation. You know, we talk about vocation in the church. Well, we have vocate calls to different things in our lives, and they're not always, you know, career or marriage or whatever. It's something else. So yeah, that's a great insight. But I love that. I love that montage of him building the field, and then what's going to happen. And like many calls, he has to wait a whole season. He waits a year basically, because, you know, he's looking out the window waiting to see something and nothing happens. And you see it's snowing and it's Christmas and nothing happens. And then one day they're arguing about money, and his daughter says, what's the man doing out on the field?
I think I thought you know, like a little child shall lead them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because she does all the time. She's always like, Daddy, there's a man on your field.
Yeah.
Daddy, the baseball game has started.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't have to give up the farm, Daddy.
Yeah.
Just little voice all the time.
Oh yeah. Yeah. She's always kind of the voice of reason, kind of. I mean, voice of reason within the call, but
Mhm.
yeah, she's always kind of the one to, you know, kind of say, oh no, you can keep doing this. This is fine.
You know, and it occurs to me too that he always knew it was Shoeless Joe from the beginning. When Annie kept saying, well, what do you think this means? And he's like, it's got to be Shoeless Joe. If you build it, he will come. He's got to be Shoeless Joe, because, you know, my dad always talked about him, and it was my dad's greatest hero. So, and then he gives him a little background on Shoeless Joe Jackson and the White Sox. So.
And of course, he goes out and gets to meet Shoeless Joe and throw pitches at him. I love the of course, the first time he tries to swing and he misses, it just kind of boom, you know, does, you know, batting practice and misses. The second, you know, gets a couple out there, and then he switches to doing pitching. And that scene where Ray Liotta, Shoeless Joe, hits the ball bag, that was a mistake. And Kevin Costner was able to just react so well that they just kept it in the movie.
Oh, and he says, can you hit my curve?
Yep.
And he hits it. Yeah.
And
So that
Kevin
line
Costner
drive right back
dives
at him.
and yep. That was a mistake. That was supposed to happen. He was supposed to, again, I suppose he was probably supposed to pop it out, you know, out
He
home
just
run.
stays in
But
character.
yeah.
I love the lines. Don't we need a catcher? Not if you get it near the plate, we don't.
Yeah. Did such a good, Ray Liotta did such a good job of just kind of deadpanning so many lines like that. It's like, no, that ain't going to happen. But then, of course, it goes from Shoeless Joe to all of the White Sox 8. And, you know, I love it. They're sitting there arguing and giving each other guff, and they're cursing and swearing. And there's a little kid over here. Oh, sorry, kid. That's okay. I don't mind.
Shoeless Joe Ray Liotta does a really nice speech for a lot of older people who played baseball. When he talks about how much he loved the game and have played it for food money, the sounds, the smells. And then he says, did you ever hold a ball or a glove up to your face and smell it? In my family, we do that all the time. My husband does glove. He does gloves for a living. He does relacing, conditioning, repair.
Oh, cool.
And so we've always got people dropping gloves off. And you can always tell the leather by the smell.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get different brands. I'm like, so my daughter, the one that plays, she's always got her nose in her glove. And so when he says this and you're talking about it, you know, the crowd's rising to their feet and the ball hits deep, and he kind of sighs and says, I'd have played it for nothing. And I think anybody who's ever played that game, they know that moment, that feeling, and just captured so beautifully.
Yeah, that especially that smell of the leather, but just the whole sights and sounds and experiences of baseball. You know, again,
Right.
even if it's just, you know, street ball or played in an empty lot somewhere, or going to the big stadiums, just the whole experience. Yeah, and then there's a company a few years ago that actually worked with Rawling Sports to create seat covers out of baseball glove leather. And I was so tempted. Again, because that smelled, and of course it is, it is a leather that it's very supple. It's very, soft, and it would be, you can imagine, be pretty comforting to be driving with that, sitting on a seat with that covering it. But, and then again, having that smell too and everything, getting that experience.
Do not tell my husband that, he'll want one.
Yeah, I figured as much. So getting back into the story here, Ray thinks, okay, I've done it. I've built it. He's come. He's brought his friends. They're bringing friends. Eventually you get this where there's two teams. There's full teams of, people from all different, or, players from all different teams, from all different eras. And then he hears, ease his pain. And he's saying, well, I did that. I'm letting Shoeless Joe play baseball again. And that wasn't it. And so he goes and starts doing some research into Terrence Mann.
Right. And he came up with the Terrence Mann idea because they were at that PTA meeting.
Yep.
Where they wanted to ban the books. See, even after
that was such a
30
great
years,
scene.
And we're still, ban the books. And the book that they've got is The Boat Rocker by Terrence Mann.
Right.
The classic novel, Pulitzer Prize winner. And Annie's like, she's on a tear, man. This girl is not letting it go. And fun. She's, And Ray's like, I got it. And he's dragging her out of the meeting. I got it. Ease his pain. And she's like, well, what's he got to do with baseball? And he's like, oh. And then he finds that magazine.
Yep.
And the irony that the twist, the hero of the story is that Terrence Mann wrote is named John Kinsella. Well, that's his dad. Mm-hmm. What are the odds?
Yep.
So now he's like, okay, I got to take Terrence Mann to a baseball game. Really?
In Boston.
In Boston. And she's like, well, hang on. I've been real supportive of you all this time, right? I let you plow up the field. We're behind on the mortgage. We don't have any more savings. You believed in it. Why isn't this enough? You're crazy. And he's like, no, we're dealing with primal forces of nature here. There's a reason. And I feel so strongly about it more than anything else in the world. I gotta be there. Something's going to happen. And she's like, hang on a sec. Is Fenway the one with like the big green wall?
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, yes. And she's like, okay, I dreamed last night you were at Fenway Park with Terrence Mann. And he's like, and we're sitting on the first base line. And she goes, keeping score. And he goes, and eating a hot dog. And they're like, we had the same dream. I dreamed the exact same thing last night. She goes, I'll help you pack, honey. Let's go.
Yep.
Right. Right. I love that scene.
Yeah. I love the PTA meeting, first of all, was just so great. I mean, it was a little cringeworthy because, of course, you've got the stereotypical conservative moral majority type, mother, but okay, we can get past that. Cause I love her line about, who wants to throw out the Constitution, go to Nazism, and nobody raised their hand. Who's for the Bill of Rights? Who's for the Constitution? Raise your hand.
Let's go.
And she's all bummed. Did you see me? I still got it.
She was back at a protest rally.
Yeah. Flashback to the 60s, that's for sure. But yeah, so they figure out, okay, need to go find Terrence Mann. And that's, of course he's driving. Of course, I love the microbus. I love the old VW bus van. That's such a great little van. But as he's driving through Boston going, hi, I'm Ray, I'm da-da-da-da-da, and I, this, that, and get in the van. He's going to hijack him, he's going to kidnap him and get in the van.
I know. Here he's meeting his hero. Oh, and tie-dyed software, the nod to the 60s tie-dyed.
Yep. Oh, yeah. And
he slams his door in his face. He's like, I came 1,500 miles to see you. I'm risking losing my home. I'm alienating my wife. I'm just asking you for 1 minute, And he's like, you once wrote, and he's like, oh my gosh, you're from the 60s. Okay, peace, love, dope, get out of here.
Yeah.
I was trying to fumigate him.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You get the old bug fumigator.
Yeah.
And when he comes back with his finger in the pocket like it's a gun. And he knows it's not a gun, and he knows it's not a gun, and and he's about to hit him with the crowbar, and he's like, wait, you're a pacifist. He's like, oh, dang it. What's it going to take to get you to just leave me alone? You got to go to a baseball game.
Yeah.
Fine. Well, let's go.
It was interesting, though, because there's that article, which at that time, Terrence says, I didn't actually say that, where he was, he was a fan of he loved going to Ebbets Field. He wanted to play in Ebbets Field. And he stopped going to baseball after it was torn down, after the Dodgers left. Well, of course, Ray was rooting for the Brooklyn Dodgers, who played in Ebbets Field. So there was that connection there between the two of them, where they both had this love of baseball from this field and from this team. I thought that was kind of a cool connection. Of course, eventually he does admit, yes, I did say that. And yes, it's true, but he didn't want to admit at the time that he was annoyed with Ray.
Well, it wasn't time to admit it yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when he admits it later, it's like that big reveal of why you. It's like, because the game means as much to me as you thought.
Yep, exactly.
So, yeah,
exactly. That's so true. Okay, well, of course they go to the game. They go to Fenway Park, and which by the way, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon were teenagers in that scene somewhere. I didn't see them, but they're there somewhere.
I didn't see them, and I didn't know it, so I wasn't looking for them. But now I'm going to go back and look.
Yeah, this is very, very early on. They were teenagers, so they were kind of just starting their careers.
I was too busy picking my jaw up from the fact that 2 hot dogs and 2 beers cost $7.
Yeah. And that was ballpark cost.
I know. You can't get one of those today for $7.
Well, you could still find a $1 dog night, maybe, but not the beers. Each beer would be $8, $15. It's been a while since I've been to a pro game. So our little field here, one of the breweries, the microbreweries here in town, will do a $5 beers, and they're the 20-ounce beers. So it's basically the same cost as a pint at their pub, their brew pub. So that's when I'll go up there so I can go drink cheap beer. But yeah, that's another great scene where he's sitting there, he's eating, Terrence is sitting there eating his hot dog, drinking his beer. But if he didn't have a hot dog and beer in his hand, his arms would be crossed the whole time.
Yep. And he's keeping score, Ray's keeping score. And it looked like it's around the third, maybe between third and fourth innings. And all of a sudden, there's another message. Yeah.
Before we get to that, just again, for those who might not be baseball fans, that's part of the baseball experience, is keeping score. It's writing down what each batter does, what pitcher does, all the different codes, 2B and 3, 2, 1, all the different numbers and everything, and who got who out and who got the home runs. And that's such a baseball experience, to do that. No, I don't know. I know some sports people like to keep track of, like for football, how many yards and stuff like that, but it's not the same. Not the same as baseball.
No. And it's kind of a shorthand.
It's basically writing the story of the game throughout. You can go back and literally read the story of what happened when you kept score like that. And there's no other game that you can really do that with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they kind of do some of that, like I said, with football now, where they can show it on, you can watch the game through the Gamecast online, but it's still not the same as baseball with that. It really isn't. But yeah, he gets his message, and it's on the display board. He sees the display board flickering, and then go the distance, and that's where he finds out about Moonlight Graham. That he's to go find this Moonlight Graham in Minnesota, and he of course he turns to Terrence and said, "Do you see it? See what? Did you hear it? No. What? Did you get another message? Yeah. Well, doesn't matter. You don't need to be here. Let's go." And then.
And when he drops him off, and then he starts to pull away, he's like, "Man, Ray, I wish I had your passion. You've got such a passion. That's a great thing to have." And he's like, "You got a message, didn't you?" "Well, yeah. What's it say?" "I'm not telling. It's no big deal." And he starts to drive off. And when the headlights hit, Terrence Mann, James Earl Jones, standing in that street like that. And he says, "Go the distance." And you're just like, yes.
Yep. Yeah. He mentions, that Moonlight Graham's like, "I'm crazy to do this, but let's go."
Right. All of a sudden he's all in. It's kind of like Annie when she realized that, she had the dream of him at Fenway Park. All of a sudden it's the exact same thing with Terrence Mann. "All right, I'm all in. Let's go."
Yep.
Okay, what changed?
And we get the road trip sequence again. I love that they do the little interspersed road trip sequences where they have they make the stops and hit the little cheap hotels. And
yeah, do you realize how long that drive is?
Oh yeah. That's 2/3 or at least half the country, if not 2/3 of the country.
23 hours. Yes, I'm the crazy person who mapped it out.
Yeah.
23 hours today on the interstates to drive to Chisholm, Minnesota.
Yeah. Now I'm trying to remember, is that more northern Minnesota?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, it's up near Canada.
Yeah, by Duluth in that area. So, yeah, I thought so, but I couldn't remember for sure.
Moonlight Graham, Doc Graham, was actually from North Carolina. He's from the South. And, he played in a number of sort of minor leagues, actually up and around New England for a bit before he got into his one major league game. And then, unlike in the movie, he played for 3 years in the minor leagues before he left. But I was trying to look it up because I was wondering, I thought that's so interesting. Like, how did he go from his family's in the South and playing on the East Coast to being a doctor all the way out in Minnesota? I don't know. There was nothing that really indicated why that was, but he spent 50 years as a doctor out in Minnesota.
Well, we know his father was a doctor, and that's why he became a doctor as well.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he was married for most of his life as a doctor, and of course, was part of the community. Was beloved by the community.
That one scene where that woman's reading the obituary, that's his actual obituary that she's reading in the movie. And so all those things that they talk about him and what he did as a doctor in the community, those are all actually him.
That's what makes it so fun. Because he was a real person. And as we said earlier, he was, the people that were being interviewed about him by Terrence Mann were real people who knew him from the community. And, we're more than happy to come down to the shooting and talk about him. So that's pretty cool. That's really, really cool. Yeah. But then, we have that, of course, he had died. We find out that he had died in 1972. And so all of a sudden, Ray's back in 1972. I love the old Plymouth where he scrapes the mud off the license plate and, to see it's 1972. And The Godfather was the greatest new movie ever,
Yep.
And sure enough, who's walking on the streets out there?
Yep.
But old Doc Graham.
Yep. Heading home for supper.
Mm-hmm. And they get to talking, and he asks him about, that experience in the majors, that one half an inning. And what was really neat, he said, well, what was your wish? What would you have wanted to do? You never got to hit? And he's like, man, I would like to have stared down a major league pitcher. And right as he's in his windup, wink. I mean, all of us are laughing because it's just so silly. But when he describes what he wished he could have done, so Ray's like, hey, what if I told you I got a field and you could do that? You want to go with me? And he's like, nope. He's like, man, 50 years ago, you came this close. And some men would kill to get that close to their dream. They'd consider it a tragedy. And I love what he says in return. He says, son, if I had never become a doctor, that would have been a real tragedy.
Yeah.
And you're just like, and then he smiles. And you're just like, oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was, but then of course on the drive back, they're leaving town or, somewhere on the way back to Iowa, and they see a hitchhiker who has baseball stuff and looks kind of old fashioned. And it was Archie Graham.
Yeah.
At a much younger age.
All the karma I can get.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I'm just going to do this.
Oh, and they were going home. Remember, he had finally spoken to Annie, and she said the bank sold the note on the farm when they're going to foreclose in the morning or the next day.
Well, sold it to her brother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, her brother is going to.
He was kind of a slimy character through about 90% of the movie till the very end.
I know. I was wondering, why is her brother like trying to force them to sell and
to make money off of it,
being so mean to them? Never made sense to me.
And see, he thought he was being nice to them. The bank could have sold it to anybody. But he bought it, he and his partners, so that he had worked out a deal. You sell it to us and we'll let you stay on the land. We'll help you out. We'll make sure you get through all of this financially. And he thought he was doing her a favor.
Yep. And she refused to sign until Ray was back.
Yeah.
You know, so, but she didn't tell him, that they were sitting there in the kitchen waiting for him, waiting for signatures.
Mm-hmm.
But it does come to a head here when they do get back, including picking up Archie Graham, and they're all out there playing, and they're, and it's such great scene. Of course, he goes out there and he gets in uniform and he goes and gets his hit. That's such a fun scene where he does his little wink and the pitcher gets mad and throws at his head. And
right. That's another. I told you we all have baseball quotes that we use a lot around the house. That's another one. So the first two are high and tight. What's the next one going to be? Well, either low and away, or what do you think? Either low and away or in my ear. Well, the one we always say is, well, look for low and away, but watch out for in your ear.
Yeah, exactly. That's such a great line. Again, another baseball thing. I mean, that's another part of baseball. They try to crack down on it, but giving a pitcher or giving a hitter a couple little warning shots like that is a part of the sport as well.
Well, when the first one goes by and the kid looks so terrified and the catcher says, be glad that wasn't his fastball.
Yeah.
And he turns to the umpire. Hey, how about a warning here? He goes, yeah. Watch out. You don't get yourself killed, kid.
Yeah.
It was so he basically gets to live out his dream.
He got his dream. This, again, we're talking about, this was hopes and dreams, fulfilled, and he got his fulfilled dream through the field of dreams. And this is where, and this is where the sale comes to, this conflict about the sale comes to its head, and he comes walking through. I love that he walks through the park, not having a clue, and the batter's ready to go after him. Wonder if he actually would have realized it when the batter swung at him, but that's another story. And there's this argument and there's this fight about, selling it, and you get Karen there saying, don't do it. And, and
Daddy, you don't have to sell the farm.
Yeah. And gets to this horrible scene where she's knocked down picked up and basically thrown off on accident off the top of the little bleachers there.
That one always felt a little off to me, that they're having this discussion and they're, people will come, you're broke, you'll lose everything. But he goes up, and we'll put Terrence Mann aside for a second, but he goes up the little girl sitting on the top of those bleachers, which I can't sit up there without something on my back. I'm always worried I'll fall.
Oh yeah.
And this little girl sitting up there, and he actually picks her up and lets her go. And I just can't imagine anybody would do that to a child, even especially her uncle, except that it sort of is forced because of the movie. I mean, she has to fall, and so something has to make her fall. Well,
and he picked her up. I would assume picked her up to get, talk to her at eye level, and Annie kind of grabs at her, and I think that's what causes him to lose it. But still, it was a bit, why didn't he stand on the ground next to the bleachers and talk to her instead of coming up to her and standing over her? Mm-hmm. Things like that, Yeah, that's probably the weakest part of the movie, I would say, is that little scene. But then it leads to that great scene of Doc Graham coming off the field again as the doctor.
All the feels when when she falls and they're like, is she breathing? And he just looks up at Archie. And Archie looks back at him. And you're thinking back to that speech, if I hadn't been a doctor, that would have been the tragedy. He starts to walk and he drops the glove. He looks down, he steps across, and he saves her. And you're just like, but he can't go back.
Yep. Goes, back to the old man in his suit and saves her. And he, it's like, oh, this is so wonderful. You go back. It's like, oh, you can't go back, can you? Mm-mm. He's like, no, but he got his dream. He got his wish, so.
And not only that, when he does walk off and back into the corn, out there, Shoeless Joe says, hey, Ricky, you were good. So he gets that affirmation from one of the greatest ball players of all time.
Exactly.
And all the guys are, encouraging him and, hey, man, thanks a lot. Glad to be here. Shaking his hands, kind of slapping him on the shoulder, calling out to him, showing him that respect. And you're just like, oh.
And then this is the point where we have that great line from Terrence. The one constant through all the years, Ray, has been baseball. America has rolled by like an army of steamrollers. It's been erased like a blackboard, rebuilt and erased again. But baseball has marked the time. This field, this game, it's a part of our past, Ray. It reminds us of all that was once good and it could be again. And I think every person who watches this movie and loves baseball, they hear that line and it's like, yes, that's what it's about.
And as he talks, his back is to the field. And I love the visual. All the ball players come forward. They're all circling around him on the field and they start to move forward. So they fill the screen behind him. And it's just such oh, I got chills.
Yeah, it's such a great scene. And this is where Mark goes, hey, where all these players come from?
Don't sell this field, Ray. Don't ever sell the field. Okay, now you're
he's ripping up his own paper, and then the last of Terrence, that he gets the invitation to go join. Of course, first Kevin Costner, Ray's thinking, oh, it's me. I'm the one who built the stadium. I'm the one who did all this. No, him. It's his time to go into the cornfield.
And we just saw The Chosen in theaters, the episodes 7 and 8. And there's a scene in there that I immediately thought of when I saw this. And I know they're 30 something years apart, but Ray's like, I have done everything you asked me to do. I didn't understand, but I did it. And I haven't once asked you what's in it for me. And all I could see was that scene from The Chosen where the John is talking to Jesus and Jesus is like, I want you to stay here. And John's like, no, I don't want to stay here. I want to go. No, I need you to wait. No. And it's the same thing. How many times do we hear, you've got to do this? And we're like, absolutely not. What's in it for me? What are you saying, Ray? I guess I'm asking what's in it for me. And they're like, really?
You did it for what was in it for you? That's why you did all this?
And he actually looks embarrassed. You're like, oh, man, you're right.
Yeah. And sometimes that's part of a call is vocation is, you're going to argue against it, but having that realization of, no, this is what I'm called to do. And no, I might not get anything out of it, or at least earthly gain out of it.
Mm-hmm. And for Terrence, this was his purpose. And he finds his purpose here. And when he goes out, he's giggling. He's like a little schoolboy again. He's like
sticking his hand into the cornfield and pulling it back out and looking underneath. And
you can't watch it without smiling because of his laugh. I mean, this big James Earl Jones, and he's just kind of giggling. It's just such a joy.
Yeah. And then we come to the final scene. He's gone into the field and all the other players are following him except Shoeless Joe. And they're talking and one more player is out there. He pulls off his mask and it's Ray's dad, John. And they're talking. Of course, Ray doesn't want to say that he's his son. Of course, we know John knows that Ray's his son because they've shown that they know what their lives were. They have their memories of their lives. And so John's starting to kind of walk away and he goes, hey, Dad, would you like to play catch or throw catch? Or I've never heard that way of phrasing it, but basically playing catch.
You want to have a catch.
Have a catch. There you go.
Yeah. Want to catch. That's
Yeah.
I know. I started crying the minute he said it's my father. I'm just like,
Yep. Yeah. That's the dust fills the room at that point.
Yeah. They have such a beautiful interaction too. And the dad, John, says, it's so beautiful here. It's like a dream come true. Can I ask you something? Is this heaven? And it's the second time because Shoeless Joe asked it at the beginning of the movie.
Exactly.
Is this heaven? And he says, it's Iowa.
Yeah.
And he asks his dad, is there a heaven? And his dad said, oh, yeah, it's the place where dreams come true. And Ray looks around and he looks out and he sees his wife and his daughter on the porch laughing. And he looks at the house and the field and the sunset and his father. And he says, well, maybe this is heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And they say goodnight, they shake hands. And then he gets redemption. Do you want to have a catch? because that right there was, where he said he never reconciled with his father before he left and his father died. And he had said this horrible, awful thing to his dad. And he wanted to come home and didn't know how. And his father died before he could take it back. It's like perfection.
Yeah. And we see them playing catch, and it pans up and you see all the cars pulling into the yard, just as Terrence said they would. People would suddenly be drawn there, and they'd happen to have the $20 to as a donation and come and watch. And oh yeah, that's the end of the movie right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the music swells, and the music is beautiful.
James Horner, one of the great composers, one of the great movie composers. So understandable. And of course, you can go to the Field of Dreams. It still exists. You can go to Dyersville, Iowa, and see the game. One thing I would have loved to have done is 2001 and 2002, MLB built a stadium next to it. So the original park, or the original diamond, is there. And then they built a new stadium next to it. And they had MLB at the Field of Dream games in 2011, 2012. It doesn't sound like they're going to have one in 2013, though, because I think they're actually turning that stadium into like a youth camp and stuff like that. So they're actually building on it more, the people who own the original diamond. But you can go and see the original field, and you can go to the donate your $20. That's what they ask, just for a donation of $20. But I guess a couple of years ago, something like 65,000 people visit every year. I mean, that's just incredible. Right. So you can go walk the field. You can go see the field.
That's the one thing that might get me to go to Iowa.
Yeah. I have been through Iowa, but I've never been there. Yeah. Twin Cities, I don't know. Can make a slide trip if you ever want to go to Minneapolis, St. Paul. No. So with that, is there anything that either of you would like to kind of mention?
I feel like I've done a lot more talking. Noëlle, you...
Yeah, you've been a little bit quieter. We've been kind of overrunning you here. Sorry.
Well, that's okay. No, it is beautiful. So one thing, kind of just tying up the whole Terrence Mann, like what is his purpose there? And he comes to with Ray, and he says, I'm going to go back with you. And he gets to see the players, and he gives his beautiful speech. And then he gets invited to go off into the corn with all the players. And you're like, well, that's interesting, right? Why does he get to go? And you just say, well, it's what a great story. I'm going to get to, I'll write about it basically when I get back, which is significant because he hasn't been writing for a long time. But it also occurs to me that, I don't know, perhaps one of the reasons that he's going into the corn is because, well, he hasn't been to a baseball game since Ebbets Field was torn down. The only way to get back to Ebbets Field is to go into the cornfield.
Good point.
And so that's really what he's doing, is going back to the place where his love of baseball kind of dried up, I guess, for a while, for a rekindling. So I just thought that's just a really interesting part of it. And also, this is something we haven't really talked about here a little bit, but it's really interesting how many different literary references there are in the movie, or other kinds of references. Like, if you don't know, they kind of slip past you, but they put so many just little things in it, to give it kind of just that depth and that nod to a lot of different, a lot of Kinsella's writings kind of pop up here and there in the conversation, but then just other little things, like when Annie is reading the article and she's like, oh, we had a bat named Rosebud, right? Which is a throwback to Citizen Kane. And, there's just all these little things throughout the movie. So it kind of makes it fun. It's like this little treasure hunt as you're watching it to see what will pop up next. So
it's like when he was in the seed store Crazy by Patsy Cline was playing in the background.
Yep.
Things like that. Just something real
Right.
subtle. I'm crazy. And then everybody's looking at him like.
Right. Or like we mentioned before with Jimmy Stewart and Harvey being on, or at that point too, there's just all these little
That's a little
things that
Easter
they
egg.
throw in. So yeah.
And using that real obituary that you brought that up earlier, the real obituary.
Well, again, not even just a real obituary, but also, again, the people that they interviewed, allowing them to be interviewed on camera and, have that as part of the movie. Again, that's the same kind of thing, known because I mean, it's like, okay, he went and talked to people of this town. No, these were real people from that real town that met the real person, stuff like that.
Right.
Absolutely.
But
So,
right. It really plays on the nostalgia we all have for America's pastime, our own childhoods, and the time when we were talking before, when things was simpler for all of us, whether it was the 80s or our childhood, but that time when everything was simpler and we had dreams, and whether those dreams were fulfilled or not, but the necessity, I think, of having dreams, and even if they're not fulfilled, of still remembering them with affection, I guess, really plays on that and reminds us how important that is.
that's great.
And I like how Doc, now, he didn't have any regrets. He did get that opportunity, and maybe it didn't turn out the way he wanted it to, but he didn't have any regrets about it, because if he had played ball, he wouldn't have been a doctor. And so it led him still to where he needed to be.
Right.
And I like to think that the movie itself is evergreen in a way that's timeless. I was just thinking that it would be nice to hear from younger people to see if they have that same sense of nostalgia or looking back or even understanding all these ball players. And I'd like to think that, yes, they do. But it might just be because we've raised our kids on it. So in our house, especially, it's one of those movies. If it's on, we're all coming in the room and sitting down. So,
well, we were talking a little, before we started recording about kind of that question. When did you first, watch this movie? But this is the movie that introduced me to Shoeless Joe Jackson. I didn't know who he was before I watched this movie, and and then I went back and kind of watched, at some point later, I watched 8 Men Out, but I also read up a little bit. And again, like I was talking about, I love history. So I was like, oh, wow, this is really interesting. And I didn't know any of this. And so to be introduced to that history in that way was really interesting. And I remember, actually, I didn't know that this was based on a book as well. And I remember I was babysitting for a family, and there on their bookshelf, there was the book.
Oh, cool.
So I pulled it out and I read it, but I don't remember a whole lot. It's been a long time. And it all, when it's a book and the movie, they all like go together, right? So I don't remember a whole lot, except for that I was just like, wow, there's a book. Wow.
Awesome.
So that was pretty cool.
yeah. And the book and the movie are very similar in certain ways. I mean, just like any time you adapt something into a movie, you remove certain characters or you condense timelines. But it's been a long time since I read this book, so I don't remember all the other ways that it differs. But that's generally the biggest difference, is just characters and timelines. Oh, and the J.D. Salinger thing.
Yeah, I wasn't aware until I happened to notice in the end credits that it was based off of a book. I didn't realize it was until watching it for this. So
yeah.
So now I have to go find that book.
I say one other interesting thing, though, talking about getting introduced to Shoeless Joe Jackson from this movie, and of course he's handsome Ray Liotta and a really neat character there, and you're like, oh wow, like what is the story? Joe Jackson was really quite a ball player. He actually still holds the record for rookies batting average and for a rookie, which is kind of amazing, like to realize how important of a ball player he actually was, and how big that scandal was, the Black Sox scandal was, you know, it was just sort of like, wow, it's again, we talk about like, you know, we do the podcast with the history and how important it is to kind of how much depth it gives you to understand those kinds of things, that, you know, where we are and who built what we have. And you could say Joe Jackson was one of those people who built what we have, even if it wasn't for all that long, and he has not been able to be in baseball for, you know, 20 years now. 20 years, oh my gosh, 100 years. I mean,
Yeah.
since the 1920s,
Yep.
For 100 years now. But he still is extremely important for what we have now, and it's important to know those things. So.
Yeah, and he was a very beloved character, or very, very beloved player, and that's why, you know, he had the famous "Saying ain't so, Joe. Saying ain't so."
Right, exactly.
Well, that's a good place to end this conversation. We had a great conversation. And thank you both for that. I'd like to take a moment now to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the secrets of movies and TV, including Stephanie Z, George S, Eric W, Timothy V, and Lewis M. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. Be sure to follow the secrets of movies and TVs and all the other great StarQuest shows on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or any other great podcast apps. We're also on YouTube at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia. And if you've enjoyed this discussion, please share it with your friends and help us grow our audience. To find discussions of other movies and TV shows and to send feedback, please visit sqpn.com/secrets. Our email for feedback is secrets@sqpn.com, and you can follow StarQuest on social media. Our Facebook is facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or on Twitter at SQPN. You can also join the discussion on our Discord, which we hope you will join us there at sqpn.com/Discord. As we finish, I'd like to thank you both for being here. Noëlle, thank you for joining me in sharing the secrets of Field of Dreams.
Been great talking about a great movie.
Yes, it was. And Shelly Kelly, thank you as well.
Thank you, Father.
And once again, I'm Father Cory Sticha. Thank you for listening to the secrets of Field of Dreams on StarQuest.
Here's another show on the StarQuest Network you're sure to enjoy. The Secrets of Technology. Find it wherever fine podcasts are found, or at sqpn.com/technology.